Hey, everybody, I'm Dr. Rob Silverman here, Proven Health Alternatives. I've got an esteemed colleague. Nobody knows the brain better than Dr. Patrick Porter. How are you, Doc?
I'm doing great, and thanks for that.
No worries. I'm happy you're here. Let's just jump in. I mean, you are an expert in the brain, and without question, the brain is the top of everybody's consciousness, no pun intended. So why don't you tell everybody some great facts about the brains and what you're trying to do to ameliorate a lot of the neurodegenerative diseases out there in the world today?
Well, I'll start with the three main things we need to work on for the brain. Number one is diet. You can't outthink a bad diet. Your brain needs to be a fat burner, and a lot of people are out there eating sugar, so their body can either burn sugar or burn fat. So, what you can do for the brain, one of the biggest things you can do for the brain is eliminate the sugar consumption and start eating a healthier diet with the healthy foods for the brain, like eating more low glycemic foods and fruits, and basically eating in a way that we're not farmers anymore. I mean, so we're not out there working our tails off. So a carbohydrate diet would work when you're on the farm, but when you're sitting in your chair all day, and that's the second thing. They say that sitting is the new smoking. So for the brain, if you think, the reason that is when you're sedentary all day long, the nervous system starts to think that's normal and actually starts to shut down because it needs to be moving to really work. And that's why things like Tai Chi, yoga, dancing, even walking, if you're out there and you say, I just can't do anything, one of the best exercises for the brain is to walk and swing the arms and have somebody videotape you. And if you look ridiculous walking, then there's probably a brain dysfunction. I have a lot of my colleagues that are chiropractors that actually watch people walk, and they can tell there's a brain dysfunction just by the way their arms swing and the way they carry their gait. So these are signs. But number three, what we do is something called brain fitness, because what we have to do is our brain, because of the stress we're under, I mean, the incredible stress that everyone is feeling today, that stress, which is called the sympathetic system, we call it a neurological lock. The brain gets patterned to thinking that this stress is always going to happen. Now, if we think about our ancestors, they might have had 5 stressful events a week, and that would be an extreme because usually they would just be out there picking berries or going on the hunt or doing whatever, and that was just part of their daily life. In our life, we have created a lot of conveniences, but they also trigger that sympathetic response. One example, Doc, is that people look at their phone up to 300 times a day on average. We know that every time you look at your phone, you have a dopamine response. So there's a really good book out there called Dopamine Nation. And what it is, dopamine is an exciter. So, and we don't get excited about what we're doing. We get excited about the anticipation of doing it. That's why when the phone dings, we get all excited. Now, what is that? And if we're fear-based, if we look at our life as a series of challenges, then that's great. But if we look at it as a series of threats, every time that rings and you're let's say you have a more propensity to be negative, you're actually creating more of that cortisol, norepinephrine, all the things that we need at the right time. And if we need to run away from a tiger. And the reason I say this, and I mentioned sugar at the beginning, is there'll be people out there that go, I don't need any sugar. I don't know what to do. But your liver, right now, as we're sitting here, our liver is producing sugar nonstop and keeps 25 grams of sugar in the liver at all times, just in case that saber-toothed tiger sneaks up behind us and we've got to outrun it. But people don't realize is that when you have all these stressors, your liver continuously pumps sugar into the system. That's equivalent to eating a candy bar. So that's why one of my favorite articles online, it's had the most reads, is called Why Stress is More Fattening Than Chocolate. But it's also a killer to the brain. So all of these things go into it. So when we talk about brain fitness, we're talking about using light, sound, and vibration. And of course, that's why I developed a machine to do this. But there are other ways to do it as well that maybe we can get into here. So you don't have to have BrainTap to have brain fitness, but it just makes it an easy way to do it. So we need to move the neurons. Think of your neurons as we age. This is another thing about brain fitness. A lot of people think as we age, we get smarter. That's not true at all. What happens is, think about how we learned languages. As a kid, we picked up a language, and when I had my children, I didn't realize how quickly they learned a language. When I had grandkids, from one week to the next, it seems like they developed a whole vocabulary. Now, they didn't learn from a book. They basically learned from a place in our brain that learns languages. And at about 7 years old, if you didn't learn 2 languages, the brain shut down that circuit. And that's just an indicator of what the brain does. If we don't use certain parts of our brain, they start to shut down. And this is called neural pruning. And so neural pruning also happens when we don't have enough energy. And this is what stress does to us, because if you're a sugar burner, you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul. If you're a fat burner, now you have reserves. Our body puts fat on our body, not because it doesn't like us. Like some people think God must not like me. I got fat all over my body. No, the body's saying, hey, these bodies were designed for the Serengeti. They were designed for famine. And so it's saying, hey, we know that sometime this year, there's going to be winter. There's not going to be all these vegetables and fruits, and we need to store this fat. But what our body doesn't know is there's a grocery store within walking distance of almost everybody on the planet. So these are things that happen in the brain. I think fear, if I could name one thing that prevents the brain from functioning at its peak performance, it's fear. So anything you can do to eliminate fear, stress, and anxiety, you're going to improve brain function.
Wow, great dissertation without question. A lot to unpack there. So let's start. Let's go over, you talked about sugar being like dirty fuel for the brain, fat being clean fuel. So obviously, if we were to make lifestyle everyday recommendations, the ketogenic diet, which is 70 to 75% fat, excellent starting point. Most people don't realize that because we are in a carbohydrate laden country. And sugar is a problem. The average American consumes 160 pounds of sugar. 63% of our calories come from ultra processed food. That's not brain food. That's brain deleterious food.
Right. Did you see in the news, they just came out with, they've given billions of dollars to groups to create plastic in paper and make it nutritious, and they're going to feed it to our military. This is how bizarre people think. When you think about back in the 90s, we had fat phobia, right? They took fat out of everything. But what they did was they took fat out, which our body needed, and they replaced it with sugar. And I know a lot of people, their heart's in the right place. They want to do the right thing. They're vegetarians, but they're eating all of that processed food. Like, you could be a vegetarian and be healthy, but you can't do it on processed foods. You got to eat close to the farm, right? And do it that way if you're a vegetarian, and you've got to make sure you're getting adequate protein.
It's funny you say about the sugar, and we're going to go down the list of what you said. They did a study in 1966 where there were 3 Harvard researchers, and they were paid off to say that sugar was good and fat was bad. And boy, all the detrimental neurodegenerative diseases really blossomed and grew. They're burgeoning since then. And that came out actually 2016. So that's problem number 1 with the sugar. You talked about exercise, and I know we're going to get into it a little later. Exercise stimulates the brain, but it does so by BDNF, brain neurogenesis. And I'm really going to table that for now and let you go into detail. And you spoke about moving your arms. It's called neurobiotics. It's great. They're activities or mental exercises that stimulate the brain, prevent memory loss, and improve memory recall. You could do it with your non-dominant hand, writing, brushing your teeth, texting, which you shouldn't stack text too much because it was funny you said that, stirring your coffee or your tea. You talked about the liver. That shows that the body's all interconnected. It shows that all these systems work together, and the big chip in the body is definitely the brain. And it was fascinating to hear you talk about the fact gluconeogenesis, the breaking down of stored glycogen into sugar, and sugar causing an insulin release. So, a misread signal in your brain leads you down a slippery slope of failing health. And, we're going to get into light, and we're absolutely going to get into BrainTap. I love the concept of neural pruning. So, pruning like you're cutting pieces of your brains away.
Yeah.
The backbone to that, and if you want to run with it, is the microglial cells in the brain. And I know we didn't want to get too technical. There's 2 types of microglials. There's microglial 1, there's microglial 2. Microglial 1 is pro-inflammatory. Microglial 2 is anti-inflammatory. And we toggle between the 2. Women have a tougher time to toggle and get into M2 or microglial 2. But I kind of want to set the table for you to roll with that, because people have been, I'm seeing some questions pop in. They're asking about those microglial cells.
Right. Well, when we think about glia cells, think of them like they're the networkers. They're the guys that goes around the party and puts things together. So think about those glia cells. They put things together. So if you're doing the inflammatory one, which unfortunately most people are hanging out, when we've scanned about 30,000 brains over the last 10 years, we see that most people's predominant brainwave is delta. I mean, we're talking about 60% of their brain wants to be asleep while they're awake. And that shows us that inflammation is running rapid. So when you think about the brain, and now what happens is the brain will lay down plaquing to protect you. So the worst thing you can do is take something that's going to clear out that unnaturally clear out, like the drugs that they take that clear out the plaque. You don't want to do that. That plaquing is to protect your neurons. So what you need to do is change your diet and let the body take care of that naturally, because it knows what it's doing. There's plenty of evidence that shows the brain knows how to heal itself. I mean, we've seen it. It has to have the right stimulus. And the right stimulus that these glia cells and really all neurons need is ATP. Because there's more mitochondria in the brain than any other area of the body, but
Right.
your eyes have the most condensed mitochondria, and your eyes actually bring in light and transmit light out into the world. Every cell does that. That's what mitochondria do. That's how they communicate. So, but if you have, let's say, suffocated the fire, and that's what's happening out there with the mitochondria, is it's almost like we have these smoldering fires. So the smoke, think of the smoke as the toxins that are building up in the brain, and people aren't sleeping through the night. So when we sleep through the night, if you really want to turn on the right glia cells, we need to turn on our superpower, which is incubated at night when we sleep. So when we go through the cycles of sleep, you need to get that deep level 4 sleep, because that's the only time the glia lymphomic system opens up. So think about it like the glia cells. There's a glia lymphomic system. This is how they get cleaned. If you don't clean these out, it's almost like this, for lack of a better way of describing it, think of it like a waterfall that's rushing over the brain, but it only takes microseconds. It's not even a second, many microseconds. And it basically squirts out the toxins out of the brain into the lymph system. But before 2015, they didn't even know this existed. So they didn't look at the lymphatic system while people slept. And now, because sleep is such a big deal, right now 2/3 of the world isn't sleeping. And it's really because we're not getting the relationship or the glia cells to work together at night when you sleep, because all of these brain waves are happening in all over the brain. It's not like one area of the brain. There are, of course, the frontal lobe has more alpha activity, but all brain waves are throughout the brain because it's electrical stimulus. And so, but when they're not working together, think of it like a team. If the team isn't working together, one person thinks they know how to do this better. Like, that's what happens when you don't sleep. You go to sleep and the frontal lobe says, "Oh, I finally have time to think." So it starts thinking. No, that's not the time. Sleeping is not the time for the frontal lobe. We want to get the cerebrum back involved and get the hippocampus to start sorting, organizing, and taking your day and putting it into the right perspective. All this takes those glia cells. The glia cells are like the workers. So think of it like a bee making a honeycomb, the brain being the honeycomb. We need those workers to store, categorize, and organize the information. And we can't just consciously do that. We've got to feed it the right substances. We've got to be active, because that activity in our body, that's what builds our brain. The reason we have the big brains that we have as humans, rather than like, let's say, a reptile or something, and we do have a reptilian brain, they're mostly reactionary. So, they don't really have a lot of thoughts. They're not musing about what's going on with Aunt Betty. They're thinking about, when am I going to eat, or am I going to get eaten? That's kind of the way they work. And if you think about a lot of people's lives, that's what they do. They lay in bed before they get up and they start thinking and catastrophizing. And then they start their day out like that. And then they go to sleep thinking about how they were wronged all day long. And then they start trying to keep score. So that's why gratitude and forgiveness and all these things are so important for the brain. It's not just psychologically good, it's physiologically good. And I believe, because I've worked with so many chiropractors over the years, I believe a lot of the mental disturbances we have in the world today, a lot of people saying we're in a mental health tsunami, it's a physiological issue just as much as it's a psychological issue. You can't change your psychology without changing your physiology. It's just impossible. They work together. Think of your body like an antenna. And for those watching live, if you were to play the role of a depressed person, you'd have to change your physiology, right? You have to roll your shoulders forward. You have to drop your head down. You can't feel depressed with your shoulders rolled back and your chin rolled upward. It's like impossible unless you're psychologically something's wrong with you. So if you want to, that's why there's that saying, fake it till you make it. Wake up every morning like today's different, better, what something's going on. And that's why if you use affirmative statements, it's so powerful to the physiology. And then that pumps into, because there's that inferent nervous system too. We've got to have the feedback. Our brain doesn't know what's going on until our body tells it what's happening around us. And if we're not getting clear signals, as we age, especially, we won't have balance, we won't have cognition, because the brain is going to try to protect us. And if everything's fearful, it won't move. There's the fight or flight that most people talk about, but before that, there's the freeze response. And a lot of people are stuck in the freeze response, and it's all about movement with the body. If we can get the body moving, the brain will work better. Your relationships will improve. You'll have better health, and then of course you've got to feed it. Because I always tell people you can't ask God to build a temple without bricks and mortar, and you've got to get the innate intelligence, the right materials, and it will do the building for you. You don't have to think about that. As a kid, I never thought about my knee scrape, that I was going to have to coagulate the blood and let it scab over and all that. I just let mom kiss it, and then it was all better. That's the way we have to think about our bodies. If we feed it the right materials, it's going to heal itself. And the brain, there's so much evidence out there. We did a study with people over 100 years old using BrainTap. We were able to improve their brain function 17%. With our dementia study we did with a fellow chiropractor, Dr. Kelly Miller, he actually showed a 39% neuroplastic change in as little as 6 weeks. And the incredible thing, when you have that brain fitness, that neuroplasticity, you no longer qualify as a dementia person, because it's all about energy. It's not about, you're not missing a drug. So you don't have to take a drug for it. The drugs actually make it worse. I've never seen a drug that actually had a long-term positive effect on person's brain. In fact, we did a study with Joquita Handy, who's a naturopath. Her husband's a chiropractor. And we showed that as long as people were taking drugs for the brain had a very hard time changing. In fact, sometimes it wouldn't change at all, because that's part of that neural pruning. If the brain goes, you mean you're going to do this work for me? Okay, I don't have to. Then like serotonin uptake inhibitors, all of those, if they were to be put through a drug test today, they wouldn't beat the placebo. The placebo is now up to 41%. So people are talking themselves in and out of these solutions.
Again, great information, a lot there. I think some of the listeners should understand that what you're talking about is a positive thinking, gratitude in the morning, maybe conceivably meditate. Those glial cells, they glue. That's actually what they mean in Greek. They stick, and they are the cleansing cells, if you will, of your brain and your central nervous system. The brain is, without question, maybe the epicenter of your health. It remembers everything. And you made a valid point, multiple valid points on that it remembers everything. I don't remember it, but my brain and central nervous system does. The brain being the number one mitochondrial spot, ATP and energy. But here's what's interesting. We've just gone through an immune pandemic. So interesting in that, and we have some questions coming up. Interesting in that the mitochondria comes from bacteria. That's its origins, and it communicates with the gut. And obviously it's a key player in the brain. But what's interesting about mitochondria is that when I think I just had a technical issue here. Oh, there we go. No problems. Sorry about that. So what's interesting about the mitochondria is that it will shut off its ATP power producing abilities when you're really sick. So when you get a flu, for instance, people would sleep it off. When you got COVID, which was a more advanced flu, if you will, people actually shut off their mitochondria ATP. And that was one of the reasons why we had such brain fog. That's one of the reasons why we're speaking to some of the mental health issues, the depression and anxiety and sleep. What a great conversation. Sleep allows our brain to detox. So our brain is like a sponge. It squeezes and goes to about 40% of its size, and all these metabolic wastes come out. And that's what we need to recharge and detox our brain. So got a couple of comments. This is really interesting info. Great to hear. Better nutrition and target supplementation helps tremendously. So we got some comments. We got people talking.
Awesome.
So let's dig
One
in.
thing
I
on
got a
that,
couple.
Dr. Rob, is in the morning. That's why we recommend, especially during our dementia study, that they get up and start by drinking 4 ounces of water, but continue to increase it until you can actually drink 16 or more ounces every morning, because that brain shrinks every night and it needs to rehydrate. And don't
Great
drink
point.
coffee. We had them, they could still drink coffee, but wait till after 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, so that's the number one question. I don't mean to interrupt you. Obviously, get up water, maybe some lemon water. Let's say I get up at 6 in the morning. I get up at 6, Dr. Porter. Nobody loves his organic coffee with a little bit of stevia and a lot of MCT powder better than Rob. So Rob drinks water with it right before it, but you want me to wait till 9.
Well, if you're okay, then that's fine. If what I tell people, I'm talking about
Nobody,
compromised people now,
Dr.
right?
Porter,
So,
nobody thinks I'm okay when
right.
it comes to
Okay. That's probably good nowadays. You're not normal. So that's
right,
probably
right. A
good.
little
But
eccentric to say the
within
least.
the, if somebody's working to balance their nervous system and they're dysregulated, which means they're not sleeping at night, they're waking up with foggy brain, and they need that coffee, and they're not putting what you're putting into it. They're not putting MCT, and they're not putting, we want to take people one step at a time. So you're like supercharging your coffee to make it work. You're putting oil into it. I mean, good oil. So that's what our body needs. So you're actually giving yourself brain fuel. That's not, when I'm talking about coffee, I'm talking about most people will have coffee with 2 scoops of sugar and, milk or fake
So
cream
it's
and
not
things
the
like that.
coffee. It's what they're putting in the coffee. So let's just
Yeah,
talk
you could
about
have
like
black
one.
coffee if you wanted, but
Yeah. How do you
but
feel about that? Give me, not for me, but the standard person. Remember, if you eat the standard American diet, you get the standard American diseases. So of course that black coffee is going to be organic, but tell
the
them what
reason
to
we
do
do
in the
that,
morning. Give a
what we
biohack.
recommend people do to really clean your brain, is to get up, drink that water, then have a green drink and do some exercise. That exercise will turn on the norepinephrine, the cortisol, everything you need. We call it digital coffee, to do a 10-minute brain tap session to stimulate the brain. Once the brain is regulated, you won't need it first thing in the morning, but you might need it because we all go through cycles through the day. For me, it's around 10 o'clock. That's when I'll have my coffee, and you wouldn't want to drink my sludge because I put a lot of stuff in it, because that's when I dump in the, like I have this, I like to low dose the mushroom. There's one that doesn't taste very good, but I can tolerate it when it's in coffee. And then I do stevia. And most people get turned off by stevia in their coffee, but that's my taste. So, and that's what I do when I travel. Usually I just drink black coffee with stevia when I'm traveling. But, and then of course, if you can't do it, then just drink black coffee. But if you can put a couple drops of stevia, most people don't know what stevia does. Stevia actually will, I tell people that aren't able to drink water, like just get some flavored stevia, put 2 or 3 drops in it. It's going to balance out your blood sugar for 2 to 3 hours. And now you've got a health drink out of your water. And you're still going to get the benefits of that water. Water is not coffee. When you drink, like you said, drink water, every cup of coffee you have, let's say you have 4 ounces of coffee or 8 ounces of coffee, you need 3 times that to flush it out, just so you know that. And in the part of the body that's doing all that work is the liver. So, so if you're okay with that, and most people are, it's not going to hurt them. There's a lot of health benefits to coffee. I'm not against coffee. I love drinking it myself. I just think if you're dysregulated, it's kind of like you've got to, like intermittent fasting, for instance. Some people, the best thing you can do for your digestion is maybe go on eating 2 meals a day for 5 out of 7 days a week, and pick your evening or pick your morning, and don't eat in the morning or the evening. I mean, how many times as a kid did we get told you got to go to sleep without dinner? Well, that's not a bad thing. Nobody probably listening to this. There are a lot of people starving out there, but if you're listening to this podcast, you probably could go, 8 to 12 hours. And the best time to fast, of course, is while you're sleeping. You're not doing anything. So, and you'll probably find you get one of the best, deepest night's sleep if you didn't. That's why I say in my sleep hygiene, give yourself 3 to 4 hours without food before you sleep, and look at your brain, look at your sleep score, because you're basically, you're walking around, you're a digestion machine. You've got arms that that bring food to your brain, you have legs that take your brain to go get the food, and you have a gut that digests the food for your brain. So, I mean, so we can see, hear, and experience our world.
All right. So everybody's asking about coffee. You knew it was going to come. You're okay with coffee. You prefer it on a little delay. Water first, lemon, do some brain tap, exercise, have your coffee. Stevia, you're positive. I agree with you on the stevia. The World Health Organization yesterday said artificial sweeteners and threw stevia in there. I'm going to put my head on the line. I'm going to say, I hear you about the aspartame and the colored. I don't see any negative data to stevia. I don't know if you want to chime in on that or just let me hang by myself.
Just make sure your stevia is stevia. They've made it not stevia anymore. You know, labeling in our country is outrageous. Just because it says natural and it says stevia doesn't mean it's stevia. If it doesn't say 100% stevia, it might not be stevia. And that's the problem. And I heard that too. It's neurodegenerative and stuff like that. But I've used it for 30 years. They used to sell it at a company called New Skin as a face mask because they couldn't get it in the country. It's just another healthy thing that they're trying to throw under the bus. And so I've seen now, obviously, if you're just drinking gallons of it, maybe there's a problem there, but it doesn't, like artificial sugar tricks the body. So the body still has the sugar response, but you don't get the sugar taste. And people, if they've noticed, people that take the pink or the yellow or the blue, they are addicted. They cannot do it. When I see somebody drinking Diet Coke, and if anybody's out there drinking it, I feel sorry for you. They cannot survive an hour without drinking a Diet Coke. It's like whatever they put in there, they put some special ingredient, that basically is so addictive that the body can't handle it. And part of it is that it really, the research on some of these sweeteners, they actually close down synaptic firing. They make you more droid-like. So that's why they just become robots to the food. They become enslaved to that substance.
Those artificial sweeteners that you just mentioned increase the incidence of dementia and stroke, brain, by 2 to 3 times. Intermittent fasting, which you spoke about, which is a fast and a feed in the same day, stimulates a process or a cellular cleansing process, which does occur in the brain, called autophagy. So you're cleaning your brain, you're getting rid of all the debris, allowing new cells possibly to be rejuvenated. That's outstanding. Again, kudos for the idea and really emphasizing that the liver is involved in so many processes. So it's fair to say that there's a brain to liver connection, or at least a brain to gut to liver connection. The body's all interconnected, and it's run by one mechanism, that 3 pounds in your head that's made up of mostly fat called your brain.
Let me kind of update that today, because now we know there's also 40,000 specialized cells in our heart called neutrino cells. They now believe that's the one that's controlling the whole system. Because if you think about it, and it kind of makes sense, because there's more heart attacks on Monday morning than any other day of the week. That's the emotional brain. The gut brain, also we have gut feelings. There's more neurons in the brain, in the gut brain, than there is in the brain between our ears. So it goes, in my case, I always talk, the number 1 is the heart, number 2 is the gut, number 3, think of your brain between your ears almost like a Google tablet. It doesn't have anything. It just transmits and receives information. And because 95% of the time we go to our subconscious to run our life. I mean, our conscious mind is doing about 5% of it. And this is based on Bruce Lipton's work, which I believe, and I follow him. And I think if you look at people, they do things and they go, why did I just do that? I didn't want to do that. But it's all because we get what we rehearse in our life and not actually what we intend. If we could stay vigilant and very attentive, that's not good for the brain either, because we become like, we also kind of have like PTSD when that happens, when we become over vigilant, and then we create too much norepinephrine, too much cortisol, too much of these dopamine responses. And that's only good when we need it. We need to have the uptime. That's why exercise is so important. And we need to have the downtime. And I think that's why those of you listening that know about HRV or heart rate variability, why that's become such a standard of care. Like they call it the gold standard to predict health. And I believe it, because I've scanned people back 10 years ago that I told them, you better get your stuff together, and they're not with us anymore. Because if your heart's not in it, it's think of it like the orchestra leader. It doesn't play the flute, it doesn't play the viola, but if it's not up there conducting it, then they all get out of tune. And that's what's happening with the body. So it's kind of like the bass drum of the system, kind of like gamma brain waves. Those are the bass drum of the brain as well. And if you think of the heartbeat, that thump, 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 that's not just a thump, it's a frequency generated throughout the system. And NIH actually has now said that we have a biosphere. So something that used to be considered like metaphysics, like we have this energy field around us, they're now agreeing with us, and they're finding out that energy medicine, like lasers and BrainTap and things like that, actually affect, because from the outside in, we're affecting internal mechanisms. Like you're talking about the mitochondria, we're actually turning them back on through the Krebs cycle by feeding them light energy, and they don't have to go through the digestive system. It's just being almost like a plant with photosynthesis. We all have that called chromophores that absorb the energy from, I mean, we've all been to a party and the music was, we liked it. Maybe we didn't want to be there, but they started playing our music. We started bouncing a little bit. Then we started dancing. And they go, hey, I thought you didn't want to be there. But the music changed our physiology because our cells are designed to absorb energy from all sources, or get basically robbed of energy from all sources. Like if you have a problem with EMF, or you have a problem with mold, and that's what's happening. The cells shut down, like you're saying, they protect themselves. That mitochondria basically puts themselves into a they call it the cell danger response now. They've actually coined a term for it.
Yeah, it's a switch that shuts off the mitochondria from producing ATP. Now, the problem with the cellular danger response, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent on that. Interesting, it does shut the mitochondria off, but it's a full sweep to come back to turn the mitochondria back on. And each step, which 3 steps, is a rate limiting step. So the unfortunate thing, hence the idea of fatigue, i.e. long COVID, is that most people don't understand that it's a process to turn the mitochondria on. And that's why you would detailing all those steps to help the mitochondria. Heart rate variability, great idea. Heart rate variability goes down, vagus nerve tone decreases, parasympathetic system. Obviously, you said everybody was too sympathetic. So got some questions for you. Would alpha lipoic acid help balance out alcohol drinking?
Well, it could, but your brain creates the most of all those things. So think of the world's greatest pharmacy between your ears, but you can supplement if you want, or you can do activities that are going to create those kind of things. And that means find things that you enjoy that are healthy, that will bring you joy, and your brain will start to create those kind of neurotransmitters and things like that.
How does laser factor into brain performance? I know you touched on it, and I'll definitely, piggyback on that.
Yeah, it's hard to get light energy into the brain because, it's got these plates, right? So, but there's suture points. But we know now that through something called photobiomodulation, it will light up the brain. So what we do, let's say that we want to help with dementia, which we do all the time here with BrainTap, we will put a laser on the left hemisphere. I would say 100% of the time, those people with dementia, their left hemisphere is moving at a slower pace than their right hemisphere. And what happens is when you give energy, or think of it like you're putting gas on a fire, and that's what a laser does. It's much more powerful than our low-level light that we use with BrainTap. So sometimes we need to assist it, because if there's not enough energy, yet they have to go through that cycle you're talking about. But what happens when you deliver ATP to the cell, it's just automatic. It instantly starts the Krebs cycle, starts to back up, and then the body will regulate. We should have about 10.1 volts across the frontal lobe. Most people with dementia, we're almost a volt off. So that means it's not going to be communicating. And if we don't communicate all at the same time. So if I asked you, Dr. Rob, remember your favorite vacation? Well, you could tell me all about it. You don't know. Most people don't know, you probably know, but most people don't know you're going to 8 or more places in the brain to gather that information. The sound isn't stored with the picture isn't stored with the person's name, all of these things, and your brain puts it all together because it's holographically stored in case you get injured, so that it can reassemble it. Now, if you have not enough energy, what happens is that information's there, but it's too much work. If it doesn't show up in the millisecond it's necessary, the brain says, okay, it's not there. And it starts to do that neural pruning. Now, if we give it energy like lasers, what's happening is we have something called neurogenesis, which means we can't bring those cells back. Like when that person talking about alcohol, yeah, you killed those cells. But guess what? Your brain is like your liver. it will rebuild itself, but it needs light. Light is the most underprescribed nutrient for the brain, and we need to do it. Now, we were talking earlier about our study with autism as well. We do it with BrainTap, but some people need a little bit more. So we put the laser on the basal ganglia while they're doing it, and also on the left hemisphere. So we have some doctors that use 3 and 4 lasers at the same time to get to activate different regions of the brain. Now, most of them are using something like the WAVI to measure it, or some kind of EEG device so they know. But once you've done about even just 20 brain scans, you start to see the same brain profile. The left hemisphere is shutting down. The basal ganglia, it's almost like think of it like your bathtub drain is clogged and they're not able to get any energy through, because the more energy you have in the brain, the more that pushes down through the spine. Think of the spine as the keyboard to the brain. And then if you don't, so the more energy you can put in the brain, that's why running and exercising and getting the spine, even in ancient tests like the Vedas in India, they will tell you you're only as young as your spine is flexible. What we would say today in neuroscience is that you're only as young as you have energy flow through the spine, because that's what's telling your brain what's going on. Your brain's just sitting up there, a hunk of gelatinous material, processing data. It's not really going out. In fact, everything you see, hear, and experience is a perception of the brain, not the reality of the world. That's why they say we create our own reality. We create our perception of the reality. To give you an example for the listeners, what I'm talking about is, let's say that you're upset, angry, stressed. Somebody didn't bring the salt and pepper shaker out, or they brought the pepper out, but they didn't bring the salt out. So you march into the kitchen to get the salt shaker. You can't see it. And they go, it's right there on the counter. You know, it's not. Finally, they march in there. They show you it's right there in front of you. Well, the reason you didn't process it was 2 reasons. One, under stress, the hippocampus doesn't work so well. But also, if your belief is that it's not there, the brain will actually write it out of the equation, because we now know in neuroscience that we actually render about 80% of our reality, which means we make it up. And if you're like me, I come from a big family. So I go to a family reunion. They always make things up. My memories are all right. Theirs are, they've made theirs up. So we all have different perceptions. That's why they say also 5 people can see an accident. You get 5 different stories, because it's the perception of that experience, not the experience itself. That's why I said earlier, fear. There's, we should fear certain things. We have natural fears like a fear of falling and a fear of loud noises. Those are the only 2 neurological fears that are based in our nervous system. The others we create, so we make those up.
Great stuff. And I want to piggyback on that brain neurogenesis. I think it was 2013 where neurologists first started to talk about it, even though the data went back that I found to 1992. The brain can rewire, so therefore it can fire again. So again, I want to emphasize what you said. Neurons and nerves can rewire. You can rewire and heal your brain. And most people don't realize that. So how do you get brain neurogenesis? Well, one of the ways, of course, is exercise. You spoke about it. Another way is some different supplements. I'll hit you with a few of them. Omega-3 fatty acids, turmeric, pro-resolving mediators, magnesium L-threonate. Without question, that is the doorway to synaptic growth. Glutathione, MCT oil talked about, taurine, pre and probiotics, resveratrol, ketone bodies, and low-level laser. Low-level laser, without question, imbues the body with the ability from photonic energy, call it photobiomodulation. I'll say it's electromagnetic transfer of energy to the body without raising the temperature to stimulate healing, because those cytochrome C oxidase and those chromoflores absorb the body. It's the photosynthesis of the body. No better place to do it than apply it to the brain. As a matter of fact, we were just talking about something we'd like to do together. Put the BrainTap on, add the laser, work on different areas of the brain on some of the lobes, and see where it goes. Somebody had a question. Will all of this help with fear of heights? Because somebody knows that I'm afraid of heights. So if I go to the top of a mountain, I will give you and tell you anything about my mom you need to know. I need to get off the top of the mountain. I do not like to drive a car myself over a bridge. I did not have those fears at 30. I have them now at this stage of my life.
Yeah. Well, BrainTap, we have a process for overcoming phobias. And to date, I've never seen it fail. And it's all about how our brain processes that data. So think about what we see, hear, and experience as the old days. We used to have fuses that would blow, right? Not just reset. So imagine you've got your fuses are all set. You're bringing too much information in, and I'll just use the fear of a spider as an example. When somebody has a fear of a spider or fear of flying or fear of mountains, it's all the same. You catastrophize it, which means that that spider is no longer this little thing that you could step on. It becomes this big Saturday matinee thing. When you're at the top of the mountain or drive, I actually worked with a guy in Kentucky that actually inspected bridges for the state of Kentucky. He would not drive over a bridge. Now, he either had to get rid of that phobia or he had to, quit. And what we found out was he knew how bad the bridges were. And of course, when you're testing them, they could fall at any time, but it's never happened. So it's an unfound fear. So but it's all in the way we process it. So there's a technique we call the theater of the mind that I write about in my book, Discover the Language of the Mind, and how fears are established and how fears then through emotions aren't facts, right? Emotion. That's why we make emotional decisions, then we justify them with logic. That's the way they usually say it. So in this case, what's happening is emotion is driving the behavior, because all emotion drives behavior. And when the circuitry gets overproduces, then the next thing is stress, then it's anxiety, and then it becomes a pattern. And the brain doesn't know that pattern's bad. It's trying to protect you. So there are ways, obviously, that we can do it. It's not just shine a laser. We've got to change the way the brain is processing that data. And that's what we do at BrainTap. We teach the brain through light, sound, and vibration to change the way the data is presented. Because once you realize or slow down the data, for instance, we don't want a fear of, like when I work with somebody, the fear of water, I don't want them to just go jump off a dock. We set up, hey, you're going to go take swim lessons. You're going to do all these things. And then maybe even wear a life jacket. I mean, these are people that won't even get in with a life jacket. And we'll have them in the pool within 10 minutes. And because it's all just about replaying how they play that in their mind. So we have specific sessions, a series in BrainTap to do that.
Well, obviously, what you and I need to talk about once we get off the air, because I was in Hawaii. I was lecturing in Hawaii, and my wife had checked everything. Oh, don't worry, there's no mountains. Well, evidently she missed one thing. And I can tell you, I will speak for everybody that has a fear of something. There's nothing worse and more embarrassing than almost losing it in a public place. Right. So love the work you're doing. Real quick question. Give me a afternoon hack for brain fitness. You gave me the morning, but you didn't get me in the afternoon.
Yeah. In the afternoon, your temperature drops 2 degrees. That's why we lose that energy. So my hack is to drink a tall glass of water and do a BrainTap session, a 20-minute reboot. We proved this with the Kansas City Sport, which is a professional soccer team in Kansas City. We showed them through HRV that we could help them recover better than they were before practice in 20 minutes of BrainTap. So if you really want to energize, now if you don't have that, what I recommend is doing the box breathing, the 4 count to 4. If you don't know the 4 count box breathing, it's very simple. You can look it up on YouTube, but you breathe into the mental count of 4, hold it to the mental count of 4, breathe out to the count of 4, hold it out for the count of 4. And you keep doing that for 5 minutes. You will find that recycling resets your neurology and gives you energy. You can also do, if you need a kicker, there's a breath called the breath of fire, which is nasal breathing, and you're almost hyperventilating. But what it does, it triggers your own natural norepinephrine and cortisol and dopamine, and then you get this kick like a cup of coffee at 2 o'clock. But it's natural. Your body knows how to handle it.
Here's the softball of the day for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me how good brain health works with the concept of longevity, because that is the conversation piece between Dr. Mark Hyman, Peter Tia, Andrew Huberman, David Sinclair, and all those guys that sit on the dais. Tell me how it increases that longevity, but especially the quality of your health span.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing is if we keep the brain energized, working and functioning, that's why people that don't retire don't expire so quickly. You can quit your day job, but don't quit your work, because our brain needs some motivation. So energy is key. We live in an energy economy. So if you're not doing some kind of light therapy, and it could be as simple as going out in the sun, but we're not going to get as much light as you need if you're compromised. You need to do something like get a low level light therapy, go to a doctor, or get BrainTap some way, because if we can, they have proven that if you can reduce the onslaught of stress on the brain till it's later in life. I would rather live to be, let's say I'm going to live to be 90 or whatever. I'd rather have 89 really good years, and then when it all ends, it ends. Not have, there's a saying, some people die at 27, but they don't get buried till they're 90. We want to make sure that we have a good quality of life. And so I still remember my grandma telling me, I hope that the way you're eating is good for you, and you're not going to regret it when you get older. And I said, Grandma, I'm not doing it for when I get older. I'm doing it so I feel better now. I said, if you ate the way I did for a while and then try to go back to the way you're eating, you'll know what I'm talking about, because they don't know how bad they feel. So you've got to start today to make the change. One expression is it's easier to do the upkeep on your house daily until and not wait for a hurricane to blow it down to see if it's strong enough. Everyone's going to get hit. Something's going to happen. We're all going to, these bodies, unfortunately, until we figure out that longevity piece and clip that gene by eating or thinking or doing something that keeps it from decaying. But after 27, our bodies have a time bomb. We can slow it down, and we can even reverse it if we keep the toxins out, keep the nutrients in, and keep the body moving. But the reality is that I don't know anyone who's lived forever in these physical bodies, but there are groups out there like, we speak at some of the conferences, I'm not a believer in that right now, but I am a believer in having great quality of life until the day I'm called, because we all have a return ticket. We didn't start here. So where are we going when we're done? And I didn't get privileged to that return ticket when I arrived, so I woke up at 5 or 6 years old and said, what the heck am I doing here? And then I started figuring it
out. Really great points. Again, to reemphasize what you said, the great JFK once said, it is better to fix the roof while the sun is shining than when it's raining outside. To extrapolate what both of us are trying to say is, please be proactive about your health, especially about your brain health. Don't be reactive. For someone who's got a mom in her 90s, and it's very difficult since she had long COVID for her to really even talk to me, and the frustration and all the balance issues after that. And we didn't get to the periphery of it all. Somebody who, my mom did everything. And I'm not saying it was right, but she attempted everything for her children's betterment and the people around her's betterment. It is something that I would strongly recommend doing some work, keeping your brain at its top game. So a lot of people are asking, how can I get in touch with you? How can I get BrainTap? Where can you get more information, articles, and the like?
Well, you can share your link to the BrainTap site and give them a special. They can also look us up on social media, #BrainTap or #Dr. Patrick Porter. If they go to my YouTube channel, they'll see a lot of videos. My team's done a really good job of taking some of my talks and cutting them up into smaller reels, of course, now that people have the attention span of a goldfish, I guess, the 5 to 7 seconds, but there's full lectures there, even where I'm talking about different things from brain longevity to how to biohack the brain for sleep. And a lot of the things we talked about will be present there.
Dr. Porter, it's been my pleasure. Without question, you're a true erudite. I appreciate all that you shared. In less than an hour, I am going to tell everybody you got to listen to it twice so they can get all your great quotes. Love to have you on again. Continue with the great work. You and I share a mission that we both want to make an indelible mark in everybody's healthcare in America and beyond today. So thank you very much. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll be back.